Welcome to the session that deals with JCPOA. More specifically, we will talk about JCPOA and progress on civil nuclear cooperation with Iran. Let me remind you that within JCPOA, such cooperation is addressed in Annex III. This is a very interesting subject for me personally. 20 years ago, I wrote a paper on Russian-Iranian cooperation using the example of Bushehr power plant. Since then, I have been working in the nuclear domain, and this is something very close and very dear to me. In this session, we would like to spend some time talking about the impact JCPOA had on practical cooperation, what has been done. The plan lists a number of projects. We would like to get some information from our Iranian colleagues. What is the outcome of JCPOA in terms of practical cooperation? What is happening on the ground in terms of peaceful use of nuclear energy? We are talking about cooperation with other participating countries, those that participated in Vienna negotiations, and also cooperation with other countries that have technologies in this domain. Let me introduce the panelists. First, we're going to give the floor to Vladimir KUCHINOV, advisor to the Director General of Rosatom, that is State Corporation on Atomic Energy. Vladimir does not need further introductions in this audience. For many years, Vladimir has been with Rosatom. He's spent a lot of time in Vienna. He has been dealing with Iranian problem for much longer than my 20 years. Unlike me, he's being very practical in his work. He has been doing a lot of work with IAEA and also Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. Next, I'm going to pass the floor to Clement Pollack, JCPOA Procurement Channel Section. Clement has directly participated in the negotiations on the comprehensive plan of actions. We have so many people in the audience who have also been involved in those negotiations. In the first plenary session this morning, we could not bring everyone to the stage, although I'm hoping in 10 years' time, when participants of those negotiations come together, we will get a chance to once again say thank you to all of them for all the hard work they did and for a high-quality document that they have generated. Then we would be able to celebrate the viability of the document, which today is under threat for the reasons that we have already discussed. Then I will pass the floor to Ms. Aurora Caetano, Permanent Representative and Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to international organizations in Vienna. We know Japan plays an important role, not only from standpoint of nuclear technologies development, despite the Fukushima disaster. We know the role Japan plays in IAEA. We know about the role of Japan in practical implementation of Vienna agreements. Then we would like to hear from Ambassador Rezai, Director General for International Affairs at Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. What is Tehran's vision of JCPOA impact on collaboration in peaceful use of nuclear energy? I would appreciate it if every panelist limits himself to 7 minutes. This way we are going to have time for a short discussion. Vladimir, over to you. Thank you, Anton. Thank you personally, and thank you to your organization. I'm happy to be at this conference and have an opportunity to speak about the cooperation with Iran in the field of peaceful use of nuclear energy. Also comment on what we did within JCPOA. Let me start with the history of cooperation, because it has much longer roots compared to JCPOA. This year in August, we have celebrated the 25th anniversary of our joint efforts. In August of 1992, we have signed an intergovernmental agreement between Russian Federation and Islamic Republic of Iran on peaceful use of nuclear energy. This agreement sets the principles for cooperation in this field, and in Article 5, the agreement stated that this cooperation under the agreement would serve the needs of peaceful use of nuclear energy, and nuclear and non-nuclear materials produced through this project shall not be used for production of nuclear weapons or nuclear devices or for any other military purposes. It is all covered by IAEA safeguards during the whole period, and we would also follow the physical protection and security measures at the level recommended by IAEA. In the initial period, we have looked at a number of things. We have also signed an agreement for construction of a Bushehr power plant. In January 1995, we signed a contract for completion of the first unit construction. The construction work has been carried out by Iranian contractors. Russian experts have done the supervision work. Installation and supplies of equipment has also been carried out by Russian organization. This cooperation was fully in line with NPT and IAEA safeguards. This was accepted by everyone, and even in the most difficult period, nobody questioned that project, and this was not a subject to the UN sanctions. Construction of this unit, that is putting a Russian nuclear reactor in the building that was initially designed to accommodate a German KW reactor, was not an easy job. This was a unique project, pretty much unprecedented. Finally, on September 11, we have connected the unit to the power grid and put it in full commercial operation. Since then, the power plant has been working in a reliable fashion, and it has generated over 24 billion kilowatt hours. Currently, Russian-Iranian cooperation in nuclear power plant construction goes on. Russian experts started doing their work on the second stage of Bushehr nuclear power plant. They're going to build units 2 and 3. Those units will be up to the latest standards of nuclear security. They belong to Generation 3+. This became possible because of the level of trust that we have accumulated in our cooperation, and because of the latest solutions to the Iranian nuclear program. It's been 2 years since Iran and P6 have prepared JCPOA. In July of 2015, it has been endorsed by the UN Resolution 2231. As they started practical implementation, and Iran had to take several actions. One was to remove all highly enriched uranium that it had in excess of the limits specified in JCPOA with the level of enrichment of 3.67%. Iran leadership set the task to complete this task until the end of 2015. They asked Russia to provide technical assistance in this matter. Russia reacted positively, and 2 weeks later, after completion and finalization of JCPOA, we started working group meetings to discuss a contract. In exchange for the nuclear materials from Iran, Russia was supposed to provide an equivalent volume of natural uranium. This required the settlement of issue on transportation containers, which Iran did not have. After the work that has been done, in October 2015, we signed a contract to exchange enriched uranium from Iran for Russian natural uranium. After signing of the contract, the Iranian side has announced its willingness to use Russian services to remove the materials with the level of enrichment above 5%. We were supposed to remove everything until the end of 2015. Not much time. We had to address the same tasks as when we were removing the main volume. However, we had to act more quickly. There was another unexpected task, that is to remove some articles for storage in Russian Federation. At that time, a ship that has been ordered by a Russian contractor has been in the Persian Gulf for quite some time, and Iran has very quickly packed all the materials in Russian shipping containers. This was an example of close cooperation with American colleagues. As a collateral for semi-ready materials, they have supplied natural uranium from Kazakhstan. When the plane from Kazakhstan came, the last shipment of Iranian materials has been put on Mikhail Dudin ship, and on December 28th, just on the New Year's Eve, the ship left the harbor and headed for St. Petersburg, where it arrived in February 2016. This cooperation allowed IAEA to certify the implementation of steps needed for full implementation of JCPOA. So in January 2016, JCPOA was put in implementation phase. We were able to act so quickly through good cooperation and high level of professionalism, both on the side of Iranian and on the side of Russian experts. All P6 members recognized the fact that Russia played an important role in removing those nuclear materials from Iran and supplying natural uranium instead. In September 2016, we witnessed another important event in Russia-Iranian cooperation within the framework of JCPOA. Russia has supplied 38 tons of heavy water in exchange for uranium. This and another similar operation has addressed the issue of access heavy water resources in Iran that was in excess of 130 tons limit according to JCPOA. JCPOA includes modifications to 2 cascades of centrifuges at our facility for development of stable isotopes. In Moscow, they signed a contract for the preliminary design work on this project. This is an 18 months project which includes a number of things. Eventually, the goal is to come up with a critical design for modification of that facility. In accordance with the report of the General Secretary of the IAEA, this opens the way for further cooperation between Iran and other countries, including Russia. As per the Intergovernmental Agreement of 1992, and also according to the Annex III of JCPOA. Let me also inform you that just before this conference on October 17, Rosatom and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, together with Iranian Nuclear Energy Organization, have hosted a workshop on 25 years of cooperation. We looked at the new prospects of cooperation in line with Annex III to JCPOA. This takes care of my presentation because I'm running out of time. I will not go into the details of the workshop that I mentioned. We have published a press release, though the information has been posted at Rosatom website. Russia and Iran plan to stick to the JCPOA requirements, which is a very balanced document that serves the benefits of all countries that have participated in its development. In the workshop, we have noted that we are feeling very positive about future cooperation and all cooperation in the field of peaceful use of nuclear energy. Thank you.
Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anton. And I'm particularly happy to have a chance to speak on Annex III and that you organized a dedicated event to this particular part of the JCPOA, which is not so familiar to the others. But to stress that Annex III and civil nuclear cooperation was an essential element and is an essential element of the JCPOA. We always consider it as somehow a positive element which is balancing the other parts of the JCPOA which are considered more of restrictive nature, because usually we are always talking about the nuclear restrictions or on the sanctions side. But the civil nuclear cooperation and the details and the projects which were, foreseen in the Annex III are of key importance. And of course, its implementation, which started from the very beginning of implementation, is ongoing. I will try to focus on 2 aspects. First, on civil nuclear cooperation and what the EU is doing in this area. And my second part, I would devote a few minutes to the procurement channel, since I'm also the coordinator of the procurement working group. And somehow the procurement channel is also linked with civil nuclear cooperation projects. So I would try to divide these 2 aspects and focus a little bit. As I said, I think I don't need to repeat that the importance of Annex III, and in particular, if it's developed properly, it makes the deal more durable, and of course it builds the necessary confidence. And at the same time, it's increasing the transparency in the Iranian nuclear civil program. I think it's important. One of the ambitions of our ambitions is, of course, that we would reintegrate the Iranian nuclear scientists into the international nuclear area, which is, of course, of importance after years of somehow isolation and separation. I think this is an important element and which we are trying to pursue in our developing of our projects. you heard it many times that we as the EU were the pioneers and the initiators and started some, and Mr. KUCHINOV also mentioned many projects which Russia developed and disengaged over many years. Of course, we immediately after the implementation of the JCPOA engaged with our Iranian colleagues in terms of concrete projects. It was mentioned in the morning session that at the beginning of this year we had a high-level seminar in Brussels, which was like a kick-off seminar focusing on two aspects, on nuclear governance and on concrete civil nuclear cooperation projects. I think one of the important outcomes of this workshop was a clear understanding that these two processes are mutually reinforcing and they need to be implemented in parallel. I think it's in our all interest that Iran would accede to all the important international conventions, legislations, which lays the groundwork for any kind of engagement, either by states or the nuclear industry. So accession to the relevant conventions, I think it's of key importance to build on civil nuclear cooperation projects. And if I mention that we saw an extremely positive development during the last IEA General Conference when Dr. Salehi announced that Iran concluded, at least at the government level, the accession to the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on Safety of Radioactive Waste Management. And this is now, in the process in the Parliament to be approved. I think this is an important development, positive development. Of course, accession to the other conventions is of particular importance, and I think it's in our common interest that Iran would have in place the highest nuclear safety and security standards. We, as the EU, of course, attach a particular importance to the area of nuclear safety, which is also one of the reasons why the first projects which were developed and designed together with our Iranian colleagues were focusing on improving the safety standards. We signed this year a multi-annual and multi-million project under the instrument of nuclear safety cooperation, which is focusing on nuclear safety and cooperation with the Iranian regulators. Under this project, currently we are conducting a feasibility study on the Nuclear Safety Center, which is one of the commitments under the JCPOA. Another ongoing project is dedicated to the stress tests for the Bushehr nuclear power plant. And this project is also ongoing, and I think there is already some concrete results which would be then presented hopefully by the end of the year or beginning of the year. It was mentioned also this morning by Ms. Schmidt that in 1 month, another high-level event is going to take place in Isfahan, but I think my Iranian colleague might say a little bit more about this. So there is an ongoing activity which is, in the context of our EU engagement with our Iranian colleagues in the area of civil nuclear cooperation. Just briefly mentioned, Mr. KUCHINOV mentioned, of course, the important project which Russia is developing. It's the 4-dose stable isotope project. I would also mention the redesign project of the Arak research reactor, where our Chinese and US colleagues are in the lead. That's another concrete project which is being implemented since implementation day, and positive developments. We have seen positive developments since then. It's not only that the EU is engaging, you will see a bilateral engagement by countries who are also represented here as the podium, and there is also engagement through the existing IEA technical cooperation projects. So there is a variety of actors which is engaging with Iran, and this is extremely positive, and we can only, call on countries to extend their cooperation, of course, in full transparency. We as the EU, we try to share a lot of information of our projects. We consult not only within the E3+3, but also with all other countries, also in terms to avoid somehow duplication, overlapping of the projects which we foreseen in terms of civil nuclear cooperation. as said, we associate a particular importance, and civil nuclear cooperation Annex III is of key importance, and we hope if implemented properly, we will all benefit of their outcomes. Now I would just briefly switch to another area, which is the procurement channel. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but under the JCPOA, we established a new authorization regime, which allows export of goods, items, materials which are listed under the NSG dual-use list or the trigger list. This is a fully transparent, a very, straightforward mechanism which is engaging at the front end and at the back end the Security Council. In between, it's the Procurement Working Group, which is composed by the 7 countries, E3+3 and Iran. We as the EU are functioning as the coordinator of this group, and the group provides a recommendation to the Security Council either to approve or disapprove transfer of item, material, good which is listed. It's important to stress that this mechanism, although we had to design it from the scratch, has been in place since implementation day. It's functioning. States are submitting proposal to the procurement channel. We provided our recommendations, mainly positive recommendations, which is also an important element to be observed. It is a well-designed mechanism with extremely clear timelines and modalities. So, and most of the information, almost all the information about the functioning of the mechanism is available on the dedicated UN Security Council webpage. Again, it is being used by states, and I can assure you that we have faced a positive, steady increase of proposals over the past few months. Of course, since it was a new mechanism, it required some time at the beginning to familiarize states and companies how to approach it, how to use it. But I can say that countries which are exporting dual-use or sensitive items are now fully familiar with the modalities, and they're also applying it. And the trend, as I said, is increasing and positive, and I think we can continue in this direction. Needless to say that it's an important transparency measure, which will remain in place for the next 8 years, till we have it for 1.5 years in place. And there are specific arrangements under this mechanism, which also requires an end-use verification. In case of dual-use items, this end-use verification is undertaken by the state, by the exporting state. If you have a nuclear-related item, it's the mandate of the IEA to verify the end use. So it is not only the export on one side, but you have also the end-use verification part, which is, of course, of particular importance since of one of the elements of transparency. I would stop here and rather leave some time open then for the discussions if there were any questions. But thank you.
Thank you, Clement. Ambassador Kitana, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Yes, and I first would like to thank Anton to invite me to speak here. And today's topic is JCPOA and the progress of civil nuclear cooperation with Iran. And this is, to some extent, technical nature, but at the same time, I suppose technical thing also happens within the whole structure of a political environment. So as for me, I'm one that has to revisit, change my presentation structure completely, and after the decision of President Trump. So, and decision of President Trump is not very much helpful from me and from that standpoint. But then I decided to divide my presentation in 2 parts. One is how to maintain JCPOA, and second, I would like to talk to how to go further from there. And the first topic, how to maintain JCPOA, and it is also related to an earlier discussion this morning, and with the participation of the architect of JCPOA. And I hope my presentation has some value added to the extent that I'm coming from the country which is not a negotiating partner of the JCPOA. And so I hope my presentation would give you some idea how non-negotiating partner of JCPOA look at JCPOA. And I would like to mention, like others, we very much support JCPOA. We would like to see JCPOA would be implemented by all the relevant parties, and we very much hope that would be the case. And at the same time, we very much hope that Iran would play a constructive role in the region and for the stability of the region and respecting the UN Security Council and Resolution 2231. And we very much hope and we would like to underline the importance of JCPOA, both from the standpoint of the stability of the region and also from the standpoint of non-proliferation. And so, as for Japan, we also, not to be being a non-negotiating partner of JCPOA, we try to be helpful and to bring our support to JCPOA from various levels. One, political level, and you can hear a lot of supporting and comment from our political leaders about JCPOA. And financially, and Japan has been supporting the activities of IAEA for the verification and safeguard and related activities and for JCPOA and also related activities. And you can see that it would be 2.45 million euro. It is not a small amount of money. And also, we have been supporting JCPOA and for practical and approach. And Ms. Helga Schmidt mentioned about a win-win, and the same thing was mentioned by Mr. Polak. And it is a very important part of JCPOA. So, with this to happen, and we have concluded Japan-Iran investment agreement, and we have concluded financing facilities memorandum of agreement with Iran, and we very much hope that with JCPOA, new era has come, and we very much hope the economic activities in Iran and economic activities with Iran will be coming back to the new stage. So, this is one of the areas in which we are doing. And Mr. Polak mentioned about the importance of cooperation through IAEA, and that is another area which we are engaged in. And we supported an IAEA technical cooperation project and for nuclear safety, and it is in the area of Bushehr power plant. And Bushehr power plant has been mentioned several times in this panel, and it very much underlines the importance of this project has for Iran. And we play our humble role in supporting the technical cooperation project of IAEA and for nuclear safety. And safeguard and verification, and it is another area we cooperate with Iran, and it is in the area of capacity building. And recently, there has been a seminar held in Japan, and for inviting a number of Iranian experts, and for them to have a good understanding about what is the mechanism of safeguard, how it is implemented. And Japan is one of the countries which has received IAEA safeguard mechanism and for quite considerable nature. And so, I suppose it is a good idea that we would share that our experience with our Iranian colleagues, and that is another area which we have been doing. So, with this effort, we would like to support the framework of JCPOA, and it would bring benefit and also for Iran, and we also would like to support the mechanism itself. And with that, I would like to move to the second item and how to go further from that. And this here, I very much thank the order of speakers. I very much thank Mr. Polak, who took a floor before me. And so I don't know how to explain all the mechanism. And with JCPOA, we have a new mechanism. And as has been spelled out in the Annex III, and as has been mentioned by Mr. Polak, and it is through the mechanism of procurement working group, and transfer of related materials and so on will be function. Then the question is, from Japan's perspective, how do you see the future prospect and cooperating with Iran in nuclear field? Then, the answer I would provide is that it is customary, and as Mr. KUCHINOV mentioned, when it comes to a nuclear cooperation, it is usually concluding nuclear cooperation agreement, and we do that. Then, what is an important consideration when we conclude nuclear cooperation agreement? And let me mention 3 areas which we deem very much important: nuclear safety, nuclear security, and safeguard and verification. And this also touches upon one of the points which Ms. Helga Schmidt mentioned, international standard. And this is something we apply not only in Iran, but with other international partners when we conclude international nuclear cooperation agreement. I also would like to add that when we discuss about this one of the area, verification, safeguard, we very much appreciate and attach importance where the country has concluded, ratified additional protocol. And we suppose that is a very much important benchmark for the country's stance about non-proliferation. And also, I would like to mention that what is called broader conclusion is something which we would also discuss in that framework. Broader conclusion, I'm not quite sure to what extent you are familiar with that. It is a judgment coming from the IAEA Secretariat, and they have taken various measures of verification, safeguard, when they are satisfied. And they would draw a conclusion that all the related materials are for peaceful purposes. That is what we call a broader conclusion. And I would not be surprised in discussing in this things, and we would certainly discuss that kind of aspect in that kind of situation. So, I mentioned that, and I would like to mention that, as for the future orientation, it is very much desirable that Iran will gain more confidence from a greater part of the international community and will expand its cooperation in broader areas. That is what we very much wish. I mentioned 2 set of issues, and one is how to support, how to maintain JCPOA, and the second is how to go further than that. And from my standpoint, like many TV games, and if you are to play the second phase, we have to clear the first phase. And I suppose that is something which international effort is very much needed, and we should gather our collective forces to maintain the framework of JCPOA. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Kitano. Our next speaker, Ambassador Ali Akbar Rizai. Please.
First of all, Antoine, let me seize this opportunity to extend my deep thanks for a very significant and timely job you and your colleagues have done. And also, I extend my deep thanks to the audience as well. In fact, Mr. Pulak mentioned that Annex III of the JCPOA is the encouraging part of the deal. So I have to be very careful not to disappoint you and the audience here. Let's see what I can do. I would prefer to have an overview of our international cooperation before and after the implementation of the JCPOA, if I may. And I would try to be very brief. In fact, international nuclear cooperation of Iran goes back to its original interests in the nuclear industry, dates back to the post-World War II Atom for Peace program era. The construction of Tehran nuclear research reactor by the United States in 1967, which is still operative, laid the foundation for our nuclear industry. The subsequent commercial nuclear cooperation gradually developed with the United States in 1970s and followed later by more collaborative and serious efforts with France and Germany. The well-known contracts made between Iran and these leading nuclear industries to construct new nuclear power plants in the south and the west of the country. At this stage, Iran's nuclear cooperation developed well so that it became a significant shareholders of Oredif and Sofedif of France and became a shareholder of Racing uranium mine in Namibia as well. These cooperations were mostly inconclusive, especially with the inception of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and at the wake of Saddam's aggression against Iran in September 1980. Thus, the international cooperation came to a practical halt. Soon after the end of the war, in 1988, the interest in reviving the peaceful nuclear program re-emerged as a matter of priority in the minds of our political leadership. Hence, a new state of international cooperation developed, notably with Russia and China. Iran signed the Memorandum of Understanding, agreements, and relevant contracts for different projects. They became the major partners to develop our nuclear industry, mainly by the construction of new power plant projects. The long-term efforts to provide the needed fuel for these nuclear power plants by starting uranium enrichment in Iran led to a serious disagreement with major Western countries. The drama that unfolded as of mid-2002 around the enrichment activities in one of the nuclear sites called the Natanz facility pushed the issue of Iran's nuclear program into a highly policy-motivated campaign. That episode and its later development gradually stopped the international cooperation of Iran to a large extent, except the cooperation with Russia on the construction of Bushehr nuclear power plant. The negotiation over Iran's nuclear program lasted more than a decade, but as soon as the U.S. changed its negative stance and the policy of zero enrichment, the glimpse of hope transpired, and the unique and quite interesting, and I should say equally exciting and challenging negotiations ultimately culminated in a promising win-win nuclear deal called the JCPOA. Since the inception of the nuclear deal, our nuclear industry has entered a new era of international cooperation with the international partners. Almost 2 years after the implementation of the deal, let me share with you an overview of achievement of those cooperations. In order to have a clear picture of what I mean by cooperation here, I would like to differentiate the cooperation based on ends and those based on means. Literally speaking, cooperation means the process of working together to the same end. Nevertheless, in the deal as such, it goes even beyond, and the cooperation is tacitly envisioned as the means as well. In other words, here we are dealing with the multi-layer and multi-purpose notion of cooperation. As incorporated within the JCPOA, there are some areas of cooperation as the commitment between P5+1 and Iran, and some of them were mentioned by the colleagues. Those areas divided in before and after the implementation of the deal. Although the latter are still going on, the former ones had been obviously concluded. In addition, the deal allows Iran to establish its cooperation with international parties in different fields. Therefore, if the international cooperation within the framework of the JCPOA and the Annex III achieve the anticipated results, one may expect the followings. First, the cooperation helps the both sides trust to each other. After all, the sides of the deal may have been suffering from a lack of trust, and a genuine cooperation may establish a confidence-building measurements through a close and constant interaction. Second, the cooperation is an approval of transparency in a given nuclear program. The more one has international cooperation, the more transparent it is. If a country has nothing to hide, it welcomes the cooperation. And if a main concern of interlocutors is transparency, then there should be no excuse for a broader international cooperation. Third, based on a reality of a normal business in a new era that no one can go it alone. Having the international partners in the nuclear industry is a must, and nobody can ignore this proven fact. Accordingly, we have established a reliable set of cooperations with the major international stakeholders in the new industry since the implementation of the JCPOA. To name a few of them, I would like to mention our cooperation with Russia, China, and the European countries. The cooperation with Russia, explained in detail by Mr. KUCHINOV, our good colleague, and I'm not going to repeat them again, and I do confirm all those cooperation mentioned by him, including the conference we had recently in Moscow. Our cooperation with China includes the modernization and reconstruction of Khondab heavy water research reactor. A consultation contract has been signed and the cooperation is moving forward smoothly. There is also a developing cooperation between Iran and European Union in different fields of safety issues, as well as the nuclear application in medicine, industry, and agriculture. And this morning, Madam Schmidt mentioned also the possibility of more cooperation between Iran and Rosatom. A growing number of substantial cooperation is developing with European countries, and we have signed the relevant and required documents together to finalize a long procedure of projects commencement. And in this area, we need the help and support of Mr. Polak and his colleagues, because many of them are pending to their decision. As an overall assessment, I would like to say that all these cooperations are valuable, and Iran has taken its part very seriously. However, one may not ignore the delays in the final decision-making due to different reasons, including the constant changes of political environment at the international level. All in all, I am cautiously optimistic about the prospect of the cooperation if the JCPOA remains intact and alive. Those of international partners who have initiated the cooperation with Iran should bear in mind the reality that their contribution are having a broader impact, not only in establishing a better relations with Iran and observing countries, but also they are contributing to the viability and credibility of the existing international legal regime, including the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Thank you for your attention.
Спасибо, посол.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rezai. We got 20 minutes for questions to the panelists. Let us focus on specific questions, and should we have time, we can continue with some comments and statements. Oliver Mayer.
One general question and two specific questions. My general question would be to the role of and the importance of the U.S. participation in nuclear cooperation projects. Is it possible to envision this type of cooperation if the U.S. ends participating in this, as you said, integral part of the JCPOA? You mentioned that the U.S. with China is in the lead on Iraq, that it's a member of the procurement working group, it's in the institutions. How can we envisage it? And have you seen a change since the Trump administration took office in U.S. participation in these institutions? My first specific question is to Mr. KUCHINOV on the Russian cooperation projects. There were also plans for expanding Russian cooperations with Iran with regard to additional reactors and also a nuclear fuel fabrication plant in Iran. If you could update us on those plans, that would be very interesting. And to Mr. Pollack, you mentioned a rather innovative and unique aspect of the procurement channel, and that's the end-use verification, which is something that we don't have in other dual-use export arrangements. So I'm curious whether how that is working, whether it's been implemented yet, and whether you think it could be something that could usefully also be applied in other contexts. Thanks very much.
We'll collect a few questions. Ali Ahmad next.
First, thanks for the panel. I have two questions for Ambassador Rezai. The first question, it's really great to hear about these international cooperation agreements, but as you are aware, several countries in the Middle East are also pursuing nuclear programs, most of which don't make any sense, but this is maybe a subject of a different debate. But based on that, do you foresee or do you envisage also some form of cooperation with these countries? I know it takes two to tango, but at least from Iran's perspective, is there any possibilities for cooperation? My second question is that yesterday we heard the deputy of Rosatom, who naturally gave a very favorable presentation on nuclear power. But the reality of the matter is that in the Middle East, in places that are not far from Iran, we have seen breakthroughs in renewable energy and breaking records in prices. So to what extent do you see this advancement in renewables, particularly with the potential of coupling with natural gas, which Iran holds a lot of in actually downplaying expansion of nuclear power, not yielding to political pressure, but perhaps maybe more economic perspective? Thank you.
Tariq Rauf.
Thank you, Anton. The IAEA Director General has on several occasions highlighted the importance of cybersecurity of nuclear facilities, and Ambassador Kitano in his comments also mentioned cybersecurity. So my question to Mr. Rezai and Mr. Pollack is to what extent there is cooperation on cybersecurity? Mr. Pollack mentioned cooperation on nuclear safety, but I understand that there is a reluctance in the European Union to assist Iran in the areas of cybersecurity. And if that is the case, that is quite worrying because it leaves open the possibility of vulnerabilities. And over the past few years, several nuclear power plants have been affected by advanced persistent threats. There have been outages, there has been loss of coolants, and so on. So this is a very serious and important question. And to Mr. Kuchinov, I would just like to develop Oliver's question, if you could expand a little bit on future power plants export to Iran, because Iran at one point had mentioned up to 10 power plants as their requirement. Thank you.
We have time for one more final question, and then we'll give the floor. Laura.
Yes, Clement, I wonder if you could give us some statistics on numbers of requests, numbers of approvals, numbers of denial, and as suggested by, I think, our Iranian colleague, the number in backlog.
Thank you. Ambassador Rezai, now you go first.
Okay. Thank you so much. In fact, about the U.S. role and its involvement in the implementation of Annex III, even before Trump administration, I would say it has not been promising even beforehand. At least what is limited to this part of the deal, and even it is worsened after the new administration came to power. And I can give you many examples that they impeded not only their own involvement in international cooperation with us, but also they discouraged others explicitly from having cooperation peacefully in very normal way that we have with other countries with us. So we do not credit U.S. for implementation of this part of the deal at all. About the regional cooperation, we have no reservation to any furthering regional cooperation with the regional countries, especially in the Persian Gulf area. And we do much encourage them to have better and better further cooperation regionally. And for example, Rosatom program can be a good and successful model for cooperation, and why not we do it in the region? We have nothing to be worried, and we extend our hands, and it's up to our regional and neighboring countries to take their own share. Regarding the need for Iran to have nuclear power plants and also the concerns regarding having large gas reserve, I just direct you to the achievement of IAEA, not our own assessment, not other assessment, as the major source of assessment based on the software they have produced to have an assessment for the countries in different areas, how much they need in nuclear power plants. They say Iran at least 8 to 12% needs to have nuclear power plant, whereas in one nuclear power plant we have at most 2%. So you see, at least we are far behind what IAEA has recommended us. About cybersecurity cooperation, you are absolutely right. We have not started cooperation with European in this area, and we are very interested to establish this cooperation. Hopefully, in the framework that we are working nowadays with the European Union, I think it can be considered seriously. By the way, our cooperation with the European Union is totally different from United States, and we are at a very good stage. As it was mentioned during previous sessions, we have held one very successful high-level seminar in Brussels, and we had a very good participation of not only Europeans and Iranian participation, but also the involvement of the representative of P5+1, and it went very well, and we are going to expand our cooperation. We have established 2 working groups on R&D and safety. On safety, we have had very tangible and good results. On R&D, we are working and discussing the areas of cooperation, and it's very promising, the future, and I'm sure it can be also another issue to be taken into account of our further cooperation.
Thank you. Ambassador Kitano, if you would like to react to.
Yes, and thank you very much. And in relation to U.S., and as has been mentioned this morning, and JCPOA is an international framework. And my understanding is that, for example, IAEA will continue to exercise its own function, and based on the decision of the Board of Governors, and also in line with the resolution of the United Nations Security Council. And but a very much important thing in thinking about the future of nuclear cooperation and in this area, and we are thinking that we are in the JCPOA world, and so where the JCPOA world continue to exist, as has been mentioned by Ambassador Rezai, and where the JCPOA would arrive. And that would be a very much important thing, and we should look into. And as I mentioned, several things to be considered in the second phase and in my presentation, and how JCPOA is implemented. That is first and foremost very much important considerations, and how we go forward in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Clement?
Yeah, thank you. To the questions about U.S. engagement and the ways how the U.S. could engage in technical cooperation or civil nuclear cooperation projects. First, I mentioned one concrete project, which is the Arak modernization project. And here the U.S. together with China are in the lead. And this project has been ongoing since implementation day. And no, there was, we haven't seen any, decrease in the level of engagement from the US side. In terms how the US could engage on other civil nuclear cooperation projects, it's difficult for me to say. They have restrictions in place. But one of the options, which I think I heard from time to time, is through IEA technical cooperation, which is one way which offers states to support or projects which are among the listed technical cooperation projects of the IEA. This is one way, but I can, let's say, difficult to speak on other options due to the, restrictions which remain in place. In terms of the end-use verification, it's a straightforward approach in terms that when a state submits a proposal to the Security Council, they also need to submit an end-use certificate, which is signed by the Iranian authorities. If it's a nuclear-related item, it needs to be signed by the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization. In case it's for dual use, it's the Ministry of Trade and Mines which is responsible. Based on this certificate, and let's say this recognition, the exporting state has the permission to verify the item, good, or technology which has been transferred to Iran. As I said, for the dual use, it's the state. For the IEA, for the nuclear-related, it's the IEA, and based on their existing verification and practices, they are conducting this kind of activities. Since we haven't, there were only, although we had proposals which were approved by the procurement channel, the shipment or the transfer concretely to Iran mostly has not yet taken place, since this takes some time. And I cannot speak of concrete cases how the end use has been undertaken, because I think it's still to be done in the coming months. But for some items which were shipped, but it's a state responsibility. So far, we had not any guidelines on the way how this could be conducted, but it's based on a state decision. Once we will have some practices or lessons learned, of course, we would be happy to share with interesting countries, but it's on a state responsibility. I can only say that some were thinking about having special teams from their capitals, including also members from the embassies, but as I said, it will depend on the state decision how to apply it. But it's an important transparency measure and assuring measure which will remain in place and is linked to the exporting to the export of items and materials to Iran. But once we have more, concrete information we can share, and some practices maybe can be shared. Cybersecurity. I looked again through the areas of civil nuclear cooperation. Cybersecurity is not among them. I stressed before that for the moment our primary focus is on nuclear safety and security, but cybersecurity is, let's say, not among the priorities which were identified either in the list of activities on civil nuclear cooperation projects. Numbers, I don't have all the numbers by heart, but I think last year we had 6 or 7 proposals. This year we already have 19. We are reporting every 6 months to the Security Council. Our report is public, and also the Secretary General makes the information then available to the whole international community. As I said, we had a steady increase. We had most of the proposals were approved, and really most. I think there were only 1 or 2 cases which were disapproved so far, which also shows that states which are submitting proposals do a thorough review before they submit a proposal, and this is an important step which is taking place before any state submits. It needs to go through their national export system, reviewing system, and then they submit it to the Security Council. Said it's an increase. 99% of the proposals were dual-use items for the automotive industry, cement industry, pharmaceutical industry. So these are the areas, and these are mainly machine tools and equipment. So these are, some of the statistics I can share now on the top of my head. But of course, one important aspect in the procurement channel, as much as we want to be also transparent and share as much as possible, but there is also a confidentiality. Since we need to respect property rights, we need to respect somehow to say the information which is in the application itself. But in terms of statistics, I can have a look on the latest figures. But every 6 months, we are publishing in our report to the Security Council. The numbers are there, and also the statistics, what was approved and what was disapproved. But bottom line is there is an increasing trend, which is positive, and we have concrete things exported to Iran. That, I think, were the questions I received.
Владимир Петрович.
Let me start off by answering a general question. That is, what happens if United States pull out in one way or another? I don't see how they can legally do that. But what if they go out of JCPOA? I think that is the worst-case scenario that should be avoided by all means. This is my personal opinion. I think if the United States take a final decision and decide to somehow, in one way or another, pull out of JCPOA, I think they will just destroy it with all the consequences following that. Now, more specifically, on your questions, let me first answer Ralph's question about the prospects of building nuclear power plants. Currently, we have a number of agreements, and we have plans to build up to 8 units of nuclear power plants. That will be Russian design, high power, 1,000 to 1,200 megawatts of output. In the case of second and third unit, we have signed contracts, and the fabrication has started. As of units 4 and 5, we haven't started practical negotiations yet, although there is a general understanding that they would be coming. Whether or not those units will be built in Bushehr or not has not been decided, but the general vision is that there may be up to 8 units built. This brings me to the question of fuel production. This is a part of the agreement that I have mentioned earlier. We continue discussions. We have signed MOUs on that matter. Fuel production is linked to growing power output of nuclear power plants in Iran. According to our experts, own generation of fuel for nuclear power plants, if you have less than 8 units with 1,000 megawatts, is not viable. So as they build more units, more power plants, as the capacity increases, it would make sense to develop cooperation in the field of fuel fabrication. We can start from simple things like personnel training, making components, and in the future, it is possible that we build a facility that will make fuel for reactors of Russian design and possibly for other designs of reactors. Those are the 2 questions that have been addressed to me. On top of that, I would like to comment on the issue of cybersecurity. I think pulling a cybersecurity issue out of the big scope of issues is not appropriate. Somebody said that there's been attempts to effect operation of nuclear power plants through cyber attacks. If a power plant is built well with all necessary safety and security features, those kinds of things, like external attacks, would be very questionable. Although general security issues and safety issues are certainly relevant and they are addressed. They are included in our cooperative projects. So that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you to everyone. Now we ran out of time. This means that we are disciplined. Thank you very much to all presenters. Let's give them a round of applause.